What if the very concept of prayer, as it's been practiced by literally billions of people across thousands of years, was actually based on a catastrophic linguistic misunderstanding?
Right, a complete paradigm shift.
Exactly. Like, what if it was never meant to be this mechanical ritual at all, but rather, a highly sophisticated psychological survival tool?
That is the core question, yeah.
So today we are asking you to just completely suspend everything you think you know about tradition, about religion, and honestly, about how human societies function. Welcome to today's deep dive. I am so incredibly excited to have you with us.
It's a fascinating topic.
It really is, because we're embarking on a mission that is going to fundamentally shift the way you look at one of the most read, most influential, and frankly, fiercely debated texts in human history, which is the Qur'an.
And I think it's a really necessary recalibration,
Yeah.
We are so used to viewing ancient texts through these heavily tinted glasses of centuries of human commentary.
Oh, 100%.
But when you finally take those glasses off, I mean, the text you are looking at completely transforms.
Yeah, and that's exactly what our source material for today does. We're looking at this incredibly in-depth, multi-part linguistic and philosophical analysis. And it essentially it takes a scalpel to centuries of traditional ritualistic interpretations.
It strips all of that away.
Right. It strips away the cultural baggage, the historical assumptions, the empire-building politics of the past. And it goes all the way back to the literal ancient Arabic root meanings of the words themselves.
Which is so crucial.
It really asks, what did this text actually say before human beings formalized it into an institution?
And the picture that emerges from that is just astonishing. I mean, we are not looking at a list of mystical spells or some catalog of arbitrary rules.
Oh, not at all.
We are looking at a forensic diagnostic manual. It's a text that dissects human behavior, predicts societal breakdown with terrifying accuracy, and really maps out the exact psychology of how a living, breathing methodology devolves into blind, empty tradition.
Well, let's set the tone right out of the gate here, because this is crucial. This deep dive is not about promoting a specific religion.
Absolutely not.
We are not taking a theological side in some centuries-old historical debate, and we are absolutely not endorsing any modern political or sectarian viewpoints.
Right. We have to stay objective.
Exactly. We are approaching this purely as a textual, psychological, and sociological exploration. We're looking at a text that claims to hold the blueprint for human survival.
Precisely. We're basically impartial observers, examining a complex architectural schematic. The text argues that human societies do not just randomly succeed or fail.
There are rules.
Yeah, there are underlying mechanics. There is a physics to civilizational collapse. And what we're going to explore today is how this text uses physical, everyday concepts, things you wouldn't look twice at, like clothing or heat or feathers, as highly sophisticated layered metaphors for civilizational development.
And that is exactly why this matters so deeply to you, the listener. It doesn't matter if you consider yourself deeply religious, entirely secular, an armchair historian, or just, someone who is trying to understand why the modern world feels so chaotic right now.
It applies to everyone.
It really does. This analysis offers a chillingly accurate mirror. It shows how we, as human beings, collectively stop thinking critically. It shows how we allow our own societies, our own companies, our own communities to implode from the inside out simply by abandoning awareness. So if you're ready to look in that mirror, let's jump right in.
I think the best place to start is with the text concept of foundational defense. Because, before you can build a thriving society, you have to prevent it from destroying itself.
Right. Survival first. And this brings us to a very specific word in the text. The word is sarabil. Now, traditionally, if you look up a standard translation, this word is usually rendered simply as garments or maybe armor.
Yeah, that's the standard go-to.
The analysis points us to Surah An-Nahl, verse 81. Let me just summarize what is happening in this verse, because the sequence is what makes it so fascinating.
The context is everything here.
Exactly. So the verse is listing blessings. It mentions shadows, it mentions shelters in the mountains, and then it says this: He made for you sarabil to protect you from the heat, and sarabil to protect you from your bez.
And this is exactly where a casual reader, or someone relying purely on later traditions, glides right past the profound implication of the phrasing.
Because if you're just skimming, you think, okay, cool, God gave us clothes, sun protection, got it.
Right, just a very literal reading.
But when you stop and apply that linguistic scalpel we talked about, you realize that makes absolutely no structural sense in the context of the verse. Look at the sequence.
Yeah, the shadows and the shelters.
Exactly. Shadows and shelters, those are already physical forms of protection from the elements, but then it explicitly mentions two entirely distinct types of these cerebral garments. One protects from heat, and the other protects from baz. Let's unpack the heat first.
So, the linguistic roots here are vital. The heat in this context is not just about the physical sun beating down on a desert landscape.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. If you look at the broader usage of these Arabic roots, the heat represents the heat of trials. It's the heat of ignorance, the heat of impulsive, unthinking emotion.
The friction of chaos.
Exactly. In the Arabic texts, this is often connected to the concept of fitna, a severe trial or tribulation that basically causes people to lose their logical bearings.
It's that moment of societal panic. Like, when the heat of a crisis rises, people don't just sit still, you know?
Yeah.
They react, they lash out.
They act on pure instinct.
Right, they move blindly, they get swept up in the emotional temperature of the room. So what is the garment, the cerebral, that protects you from that specific type of heat?
Well, it certainly isn't a linen shirt.
No.
The text posits that the cure, the protective layer against this heat, is a concept called tafakka, which roughly translates to profound, deep understanding.
Okay, defa.
But we have to be very careful here to distinguish what this actually means in practice.
Yeah, because tafakka is absolutely not just rote memorization. It's not about sitting in a dusty room memorizing old books or reciting laws in a language you don't even understand.
Which is often how it's treated today.
Exactly. That is the traditionalist trap.
It is the exact opposite of that. Tafakka is the active, rigorous development of a critical understanding of a methodology.
It's systems thinking.
Precisely. The text actually points to another verse, suggesting that a dedicated group from every community should immerse themselves in this tafakka so they can warn and guide their people.
Think about that from a sociological perspective. It's essentially saying that every society needs designated, highly trained critical thinkers.
Yes, a kind of intellectual vanguard.
Right. Why?
Right.
Because when a crisis hits, when a pandemic happens, when an economic collapse occurs, when that metaphorical heat suddenly spikes, you need clear-headed guides who understand the underlying mechanics of reality.
People who won't just panic.
Exactly. You need people who can navigate the methodology rather than just becoming another loud, panicked voice screaming in the echo chamber.
Because if you don't have those people, if you don't have that first layer of cerebral, the society simply melts under the heat of the crisis.
It just dissolves.
Yeah, it loses its structural integrity.
Yeah.
So the mental armor of deep methodological understanding is your baseline protection against external or circumstantial chaos.
Okay, that makes total sense. But that brings us to the second type of cerebral mentioned in the verse, the garments that protect you from your best.
This is where it gets really interesting.
It really does, because this is where the text completely shatters the literal interpretation. The linguistic root of bez defines it as mutual violence. It is internal conflict.
Right, members of the same group tearing each other apart.
So my immediate question when I read this is, wait, how does a piece of clothing protect us from fighting each other?
Well, it doesn't. And that is the text explicitly forcing the reader to elevate their thinking from the physical realm to the metaphysical and sociological realm. A literal shirt, or even a literal suit of iron armor, cannot stop a civil war.
It might protect you from one bullet, but yeah.
Exactly. It might protect one soldier from one sword swing, but it doesn't stop the systemic mutual violence. So if this cerebral protects you from mutual violence, it must be an intellectual and spiritual protection system.
It is an invisible armor.
Precisely. And this addresses a universal historical truth that the text is diagnosing. Complex societies
They implode.
They almost always implode from within. They fracture, they tribalize, they divide into competing sects, factions, and echo chambers.
And the text highlights a very specific recurring warning about this, right? It just says, do not divide.
Over and over again.
It argues that when a society abandons a unifying core methodology, when they lose that tafakwa we just talked about, what happens? They don't just agree to disagree.
No, they fracture reality itself.
They start relying on hundreds of conflicting human interpretations. Every little group starts following its own charismatic leader or its own specific flavor of tradition.
It is the fragmentation of absolute truth into subjective tribal truths. When the original objective methodology is lost, everyone creates a bespoke version of the law or the religion.
A custom-made truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And critically, every single fashion convinces themselves that they are the sole possessors of the absolute truth, which means everyone else is not just wrong, but dangerously misguided.
Oh, wow.
What does that psychology breed? Mutual contempt,
Uh,
excommunication, the stripping away of the other group's humanity, and eventually, inevitably, physical conflict. That is the base.
And the only thing that prevents this internal explosion, the only cerebral that can protect a society from its own internal violence, is a shared, rigorous commitment to the original methodology, rather than to human personalities or tribal sects.
That's the invisible armor.
Now, this is where we have to talk about a linguistic detail from the text that, honestly, well, it is one of the most brilliant pieces of textual evidence I've ever encountered. I am going to completely geek out over this tiny microscopic spelling quirk for a minute, because it proves everything we are talking about.
It really is a stunning piece of orthographic evidence. It shows how ancient scribes communicated profound philosophical shifts using literally nothing but visual markers.
Okay, so picture the original ancient Arabic script of this specific verse, Surah An-Nahl, verse 81. The word cerebral is written twice in the exact same sentence. Cerebral to protect you from the heat, and cerebral to protect you from your bez.
Same word, same sentence.
Right. If you were writing that in English, you spell it the exact same way both times. Sarabiel. But in the ancient Arabic calligraphy of the text, they are not spelled identically.
The visual shift is incredibly subtle, but the semantic weight it carries is just massive.
The first time the word is written, the cerebral protecting against the physical heat or the environmental trials, it is spelled standardly.
Just normal spelling.
But the second time it is written, the cerebral protecting against mutual violence, there is a tiny superscript letter aleph hovering over the letter ra. It's an intentional visual alteration in the script.
It's not a typo.
Exactly. The text analysis argues that in this highly precise linguistic environment, these visual shifts are not typos. They are acoustic and semantic flags.
It is the text literally waving at the reader, saying, stop, pay attention. We are no longer talking about the physical, grounded realm.
Wow.
The first cerebral is grounded in physical reality, dealing with tangible trials. But that little elevating Ellis on the second cerebral acts as an upward pointer. It elevates the concept.
So cool.
It is telling you that the protection against internal societal violence is a higher, systemic, metaphysical methodology.
Let me try to land this with an analogy, because when I grasped this, my brain just lit up.
Go for it.
Okay, imagine a team of scientists going into a highly radioactive zone. They all wear physical hazmat suits. That is the first cerebral. It protects their physical bodies from the toxic environment outside.
Right, the heat.
But what happens if the scientists inside the suits start experiencing extreme paranoia? What if they turn on each other, start arguing over the mission, and pull knives on one another inside the airlock?
The physical hazmat suit does absolutely nothing to protect them from each other.
Exactly. To protect the team from tearing itself apart from the inside, you need a totally different, invisible hazmat suit. You need a shared mental methodology.
A completely different type of protection.
You need a rigid protocol of communication, a shared hierarchy of truth, a unifying mission that they all understand deeply. That psychological framework, that is your second cerebral. Without it, the physical suit is useless because you will just murder each other inside of it.
That is a perfect encapsulation. The methodology is the immune system of the civilization. It stops the society from identifying its own organs as foreign invaders and attacking them.
But here is where the scope of this text really starts to expand. Because stopping a society from committing suicide is just the baseline. It's just survival.
It's step one.
Right. The cerebral is the armor that keeps you from dying. But if you actually want a society to live, if you want it to flourish, to innovate, to build something beautiful and lasting, the text provides a completely separate, incredibly detailed, three-layered blueprint for that construction.
We are shifting from the architecture of defense to the architecture of flourishing.
Let's dive into this three-tiered blueprint. This comes from Surah Al-Araf, verse 26. The verse outlines three distinct layers of clothing bestowed upon humanity. The specific Arabic terms used are libas, rish, and libas al-taqwa.
And redefining these terms changes everything.
It changes the entire paradigm of how we measure human progress.
It really forces us to ask what actually constitutes an advanced civilization.
Right. So the verse begins, O children of Adam, we have bestowed upon you libas to conceal your sawa, Let's pause on layer 1, libas. In a standard, traditional translation, libas is just clothing, and sawa is translated as shame or physical nakedness.
Often heavily tied to the story of Adam and Eve in the garden discovering they were naked.
Right, the whole fig leaf imagery.
Exactly. And here is where the linguistic analysis completely dismantles the traditional surface-level reading. It zeroes in on the root of that word, sawa.
Because it's not about being naked.
No, the tradition obsesses over physical modesty here.
Hmm.
But if you look at the root, physical nakedness is just a localized visual metaphor for a much broader, much more dangerous concept.
The analysis argues that a sawa is actually a systemic flaw. It is a severe vulnerability. It is a point of catastrophic failure.
Think about the Adam narrative not as a literal historical event about missing pants, but as an archetypal story about human psychology.
Wait, that completely changes the story.
It does. When their sawa was exposed, it wasn't just about bodies. It was the exposure of their psychological weakness. It was the moment the flaw in their resolve, their susceptibility to deception, was laid bare for the universe to see.
So when you take that root meaning and apply it to an entire civilization, a sawa isn't about the populace needing thicker fabric. It is about the raw, destructive, ugly flaws inherent in the human condition when left unchecked.
The naked truths.
Exactly. What are the naked truths of a society without rules? Systemic injustice, the brutal exploitation of the weak by the strong, unchecked greed, violence, corruption. That is the nakedness of a society.
It's the law of the jungle.
Yeah.
So what then is the libas? If it's not a pair of jeans, what is the clothing that covers this societal nakedness?
The foundational laws.
Right. It represents the foundational laws, the baseline divine methodology. It is the basic human rights, the social contracts, the objective justice systems that cover up and manage those destructive human flaws.
It is the baseline infrastructure of equity.
Yes. Without libas, without a robust system that aggressively addresses inequality and protects the vulnerable society's ugly flaws, its sawa are constantly exposed.
And when they're exposed, it's brutal.
And when those flaws are exposed, you live in a state of perpetual brutality, regardless of how much wealth exists. The libas covers the shame of societal injustice.
Okay, so that is layer 1. You establish justice. People aren't cannibalizing each other in the streets. Once you have the libas firmly in place, the verse introduces layer 2, rish. And this word literally translates to feathers.
The used metaphor in this text is just stunningly precise, because feathers operate on an entirely different functional level than basic clothing.
I love this analogy. Think about a bird. The libas, those foundational laws of justice we just talked about, that is the bird's skeleton and its muscle tissue.
It holds the organism together.
It keeps it alive, breathing, and functioning. But rish, the feathers. Feathers are what allow the bird to fly.
In the natural world, feathers serve incredibly sophisticated functions. They provide the aerodynamics for flight, they provide balance, they provide insulation.
And they look amazing.
And crucially, they provide aesthetics, the beautiful plumage used to attract a mate and signal health. When you map the concept of rish onto human civilization, it aligns perfectly. Rish represents higher civilization.
The art, the culture.
It is the aesthetics, the art, the architecture, the literature. It is the technological leaps, the upward mobility, the surplus wealth. It is the gleaming skyscrapers in the space programs.
But, and this is the absolute core warning of the text, you cannot have the feathers if you do not have the skeleton first.
You can't skip step 1.
Right. This is a strict sequencing rule. You cannot achieve true, lasting civilization, the rish, if you bypass the methodology of justice, the libas.
And yet this is exactly what human empires constantly try to do.
Yes. Imagine a modern megacity or a powerful corporation. They might have incredible rish. They have glass towers, artificial intelligence, massive profit margins, beautiful marketing.
They have all the feathers?
They have all the feathers. But if their supply chains rely on exploitative labor, if their wealth is heavily concentrated while the bottom tier of their society starves, they have no libas. Their systemic flaws, their sawa, are completely exposed.
And a bird with no skeleton
glued together with beautiful feathers.
is eventually going to crash violently into the ground.
Exactly. The aesthetics of civilization cannot compensate for a lack of foundational justice. But the text goes even further. It argues that even if you have the libas, the justice, and you have the rish, the flourishing civilization, the entire system is still incredibly fragile.
It requires a binding agent.
Which brings us to the most critical layer of all, layer 3, libas al-taqwa, the clothing of taqwa. The verse concludes by explicitly stating that is best. It is the ultimate layer.
The pinnacle.
Now, if you grew up around any traditional interpretations, you have almost certainly heard taqwa translated as piety, or more commonly, fear of God.
And here we have to pause and really interrogate that translation. Because we are mapping the mechanics of civilizational survival. How does simply being afraid of God protect a highly complex, technologically advanced society from collapse?
Yeah, fear doesn't build a society.
The short answer is it doesn't. Fear is a paralyzing emotion. It doesn't build, it hides. Translating taqwa as mere fear is a severe reduction of the word's actual operative weight.
The linguistic analysis redefines taqwa entirely, based strictly on how the Qur'an utilizes the root across various contexts. It is not fear. It is hyper-awareness.
Foresight.
It is profound foresight. It is the cognitive ability to see the cascading consequences of your actions before they happen and to adjust your trajectory accordingly.
It is the ultimate shield of consciousness. It is living with your eyes wide open to the interconnectedness of every single decision. If Libas fixes the baseline flaws and Rish builds the high-flying aesthetic civilization, taqwa is the navigational radar that stops the bird from flying straight into a cliff at Mach 2.
This completely explains the graveyard of empires that is human history.
Oh, absolutely.
Look back at antiquity, look at the Romans, the Persians, the great dynasties. By all metrics, they had the laws, and they definitely had the feathers. Unbelievable wealth, architecture that still stands today, military might, and yet they collapsed, often remarkably quickly. Why?
Because they lost taqwa.
Because according to this blueprint, they lost the third layer. They lost taqwa.
They became intoxicated by their own feathers.
Exactly. They lost the awareness. They became arrogant. They stopped looking at the long-term consequences of their decadence, their political corruption, their endless expansion.
They stopped paying attention.
They stopped being hyper-aware of their vulnerabilities. And without that awareness, the feathers eventually rot and fall out, the deep flaws are exposed, and the society implodes right back into buys mutual violence and civil war.
And it is vital to understand that the text does not just apply this to grand historical empires. This isn't just a macroeconomic theory. It applies directly to the micro level. It applies to the individual.
Yes, let's connect this directly to you, the listener, right now, because the text explicitly ties this concept of taqwa, this state of hyper-awareness, to a concept called risk. Now, risk is usually translated as provision or sustenance.
But again, we have to elevate the definition. Risk is not just a paycheck. It is not a number in a bank account.
Right. It is the holistic quality of your provision. It is stability. It is peace of mind. It is having doors open for you that you didn't even know existed.
A sense of overall flourishing.
Yes. The text posits a direct causal equation. If you live your life with this foresight, this taqwa, your risk expands naturally. Your life flourishes because you are navigating reality in alignment with its underlying mechanics.
But if you don't,
But if you just spend your life blindly chasing the feathers, if you just chase the aesthetics, the status, the material wealth, without any core awareness of the consequences of your actions, your life becomes suffocating.
it is a profound psychological insight. You can possess all the physical feathers in the world, but if you lack the navigational awareness of taqwa, your internal reality will be agonizing. The quality of your provision is inextricably linked to the quality of your awareness.
So this brings us to a massive critical pivot in our deep dive. Because if taqwa, the sustained state of constant, rigorous hyper-awareness, is the ultimate protective layer, the thing that keeps our societal feathers from falling out and our personal lives from suffocating, how on earth do we generate it?
It's the million-dollar question.
Right. Human beings are incredibly prone to distraction. How do we maintain that level of acute awareness when everyday life is so loud and chaotic?
We forget so easily.
We do. But the source material gives an answer that is going to fundamentally challenge everything you think you know. It says the mechanism designed to generate and sustain this awareness is something we all recognize, but something we have completely, tragically misunderstood.
It requires us to completely redefine the concept of prayer.
We are going to look at Surah Taha, verse 14. The verse states, "Establish prayer for my remembrance." The Arabic word used for remembrance here is dhikr. The central mission of this entire analysis is to decouple the concept of prayer from the idea of a mindless, mechanical, culturally inherited ritual, and reframe it as a highly sophisticated, active, psychological tool.
But before we dive into the mechanics of this, we must state the strict methodological disclaimer the author insists upon.
Oh, yes, very important.
If we want to understand this, we have to let the text speak for itself. We cannot project 2,000 years of Persian, Roman, or Arab cultural habits onto these words.
Right.
We cannot bring in our modern assumptions about what a religion looks like. We have to look solely at how the Qur'an defines its own terminology.
We have to wipe the slate clean. So let's start by defining dhikr, remembrance. In modern cultural practice, if you say remembrance, people often think it means sitting in a corner and muttering God's name 1,000 times while clicking beads on a rosary.
Right, like a chant.
It's treated as a hypnotic mantra, but the linguistic analysis points out a massive, undeniable clue in the text itself. The Qur'an repeatedly calls itself a dhikr.
That is the key. The text explicitly says, "We have sent down the dhikr." It refers to the revelation, the entire objective methodology of truth and justice, as the dhikr.
So it can't just be chanting words.
Therefore, by the text's own internal logic, dhikr cannot possibly be the repetitive muttering of syllables.
It's the methodology. To engage in zikr is to be in an active, continuous, highly engaged state of consciousness. It is directly tethered in the text to another concept called tafakkur, which translates to deep, critical reflection.
Thinking deeply.
To be in a state of dhikr is to be wide awake to the underlying methodology of the universe. It is a state of active processing, not passive trance.
And the text provides a stark warning about the alternative. What happens to a human psychology that turns away from this state of critical awareness? The text states that whoever turns away from the dhikr will be subjected to a life of dank.
Dank. It is such a visceral, heavy, claustrophobic word just to say out loud.
It really is. It translates to a miserable, suffocating, constricted life. Notice the nuance here. It does not say you will be struck by lightning or that you will instantly go bankrupt. You could be a billionaire. You could be surrounded by the highest quality reach, the best feathers society has to offer. But if you lack the dhikr, the internal critical awareness, your psychological reality will be dank. You will feel a profound, crushing emptiness. You will be suffocated by the sheer meaninglessness of your own existence.
Because without awareness, you are just a meat bag consuming resources until you die. Okay, so if dhikr is this vital, active state of critical awareness, how does prayer salat fit into this equation? The verse said, "Establish prayer for my dhikr."
This is where the linguistic analysis highlights a distinction that changes the entire trajectory of the conversation.
It hinges entirely on the verb used in conjunction with prayer.
Yes. Look at the text closely. The Quran never says perform the prayer. It never says do the prayer or recite the prayer. It consistently, relentlessly uses a specific word. Ikamat. Establish the prayer.
Establish.
The linguistic difference between performing and establishing is the difference between a school play and the Department of Education.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Establishing something is fundamentally different from executing a physical motion. You perform a dance. You go through a choreographed set of motions. The curtain drops, and it's over. You return to normal life.
But establishing is permanent.
Right. You establish a system. You establish a university. You establish justice. Establishing requires continuous structure, deep intention, operational rules, and a lasting, measurable impact on reality.
But hold on, let me push back here on behalf of the listener, because this is the friction point. If prayer is supposed to be this broad internal state of awareness, this psychological anchor for critical thinking, why does the text itself seem to care about people doing it wrong?
The counterargument.
There is a famous verse in Surah Al-Man that says, "Woe to those who pray who are heedless of their prayer." If prayer isn't a physical ritual, how can you be praying and heedless at the same time? Doesn't that explicitly imply that there is a physical action happening and they are messing up the physical action?
That is exactly the counterargument traditionalists use. But if we maintain our focus on the text's internal definitions, that verse is actually the ultimate proof of the linguistic argument.
Wait, really? How?
It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the physical performance is completely useless and functionally dangerous if the core psychological function is missing.
The core function being the dhikr, the active awareness.
Precisely. Look at the subjects of that verse. The people being warned with woe are absolutely performing the physical actions. They are bowing, they are prostrating, they are facing the right direction, they are saying the right words.
By all accounts, they are praying perfectly.
To anyone watching, they are flawlessly performing the prayer. But the text condemns them because they are heedless of its purpose. They have retained the physical shell of the ritual, but they have completely lost the internal awareness. They are performing gymnastics while their minds are entirely asleep.
Wow. Okay, that completely reframes the entire verse. It is not a threat from a deity angry that someone folded their arms the wrong way.
No, not at all.
It is a clinical diagnosis of a systemic failure. It is warning against doing the ritual without engaging the mind. Establishing prayer isn't about checking a religious box to earn points. It's about building a lived, conscious reality.
The continuous state.
The physical movements, whatever they may be, are simply meant to be the physical manifestation of a psychological anchor. And when you lose the psychological anchor, the movements are just empty, meaningless repetitions.
It is the ultimate critique of mindless traditionalism.
Which leaves me completely reeling. Because if this original text is so fiercely, almost aggressively focused on critical thinking, on dhikr, on awareness, on avoiding mindless repetition at all costs, how in the world did modern practice become so globally associated with blind tradition, inherited dogma, and empty rituals?
It's a massive shift.
How do you go from a system that demands you to be a hyper-aware critical thinker to a system that demands unquestioning obedience to a cleric?
It is a great tragedy of human history. How does a living, dynamic methodology die and become a petrified fossil?
The source material answers this directly, and the forensic breakdown it provides is terrifyingly applicable to almost any human institution, not just religion. It maps the exact pathology of how human consciousness devolves.
Let's walk through this anatomy of decline step by step.
It's a fascinating sequence.
Step 1. The analysis calls it the locks on the hearts. The text repeatedly commands a practice called tadabbur, which means deep, structural, critical reflection on the verses. It demands intellectual rigor. But then it asks a haunting diagnostic question. Do they not reflect upon the Qur'an, or are there locks upon their hearts?
We have to remember how ancient Arabic defines the heart in this context. It is not the modern Western concept of the heart as the seat of romantic, irrational emotion.
Right, it's not the Valentine's Day heart.
No. The kolb, the heart, is the center of intellect, cognitive processing, and deep understanding. It is the core operating system.
So when the text asks if there are locks on their hearts, it's asking if their intellect has been shut down. Why do we lock our intellect? Because thinking is exhausting.
It takes so much energy. Maintaining tafakkur and taqwa requires massive cognitive load. It is much easier to just turn the brain off. And when the intellect is locked, the human being ceases to be an active participant in reality. They become a passive receiver. They stop analyzing data and start simply downloading whatever they are told.
Which perfectly, inevitably sets up step 2 in the decline. Once the intellect is locked and the cognitive engine is shut down, the human mind desperately seeks a replacement for the hard work of thinking.
It wants a shortcut.
It needs a shortcut to feeling secure. And it finds that replacement in the warm, narcotic safety of tradition.
The psychological comfort of just doing what our ancestors did. Our fathers did it this way, so it must be right. The analysis highlights how often and how sharply the text critiques this exact herd mindset.
It comes up constantly.
The people in the text justify their actions by saying, "We found our fathers upon a way, and we are following their footsteps." And the text's rebuke is devastatingly logical. Even if their ancestors understood nothing and were not guided.
He's the ultimate indictment of the phrase. But we've always done it this way.
Yeah, the most dangerous phrase in business, too.
Exactly. The text is explicitly stating that historical precedent is not a substitute for objective truth. Just because a million people have been doing something for 1,000 years does not make it correct. But psychologically, going with the herd is incredibly safe. It protects you from the heat of critical thought and the friction of standing out.
And once an entire society decides to collectively lock their intellects and just blindly follow the ancestors, it leads directly to step 3. The transfer of authority. This is one of the most fascinating sociological points the text makes. It references a state where people end up taking their scholars and their monks as lords.
And the analysis is very careful to clarify the nuance here. This does not mean the populace literally build statues of their scholars and bow down to worship them as deities.
The idolatry is much more subtle.
And much more dangerous.
Right. It means they outsourced their critical thinking. They gave human beings, scholars, clerics, thought leaders, the ultimate unquestionable authority to interpret reality and legislate morality. They took the original, objective, divine methodology and placed human commentary, human fatwas, and human opinions above it.
They elevated the middleman.
Elevated the middleman until the middleman became the ultimate authority.
They traded the direct dhikr, the personal active engagement with the methodology, for secondhand, prepackaged interpretations. And when you hand that kind of power to a specialized priestly class, what naturally happens? Human beings formalize and rigidify everything to maintain control and order.
They create bureaucracy.
They take the living, breathing methodology of awareness and turn it into a static, exhaustive list of highly specific physical rules and rituals. They measure the exact angle of your bow rather than the depth of your awareness.
And the catastrophic result of this three-step decline: the intellect is locked, tradition takes over, human scholars are elevated above the text. What happens next?
The collapse.
The analysis introduces Surah Maryam, verse 59. It talks about a succeeding generation that came after the prophets, and it delivers a devastating verdict. It says, "This new generation wasted the prayer and followed passions."
This verse is the absolute culmination of the anatomy of decline. And understanding the precise meaning of the word wasted or lost here is critical to the entire paradigm.
Yes, let's hover on this because it is the linchpin. What does wasting the prayer actually mean in reality? The analysis strongly emphasizes that it does not mean they stopped praying. They didn't just wake up one day, declare themselves atheists, and board up the temple.
The temples were probably full.
Exactly. The tragedy is much deeper and much more deceptive. They kept the physical shell, but they entirely hollowed it out. They lost the core operative function.
Right.
The text establishes earlier that prayer prohibits immorality and wrongdoing. That is its designed function in the societal blueprint, to act as a psychological deterrent, to maintain that hyper-awareness, that taqwa we discussed.
But when you waste it,
But when you waste the prayer by reducing it to a mandatory, unthinking physical ritual, the deterrent vanishes completely. You can perform the ritual perfectly and then walk out the door and commit systemic fraud because the internal awareness never engaged.
okay, let me try to crystallize this with an analogy for the listener.
Yeah, please.
Imagine inheriting a cutting-edge, top-of-the-line smartphone from your parents. This device holds the sum of human knowledge. It can connect you to anyone on the planet. It is a marvel of engineering.
Okay, a supercomputer in your pocket.
But no one ever taught you how to turn it on. You don't know what the power button does. You don't know what software is. So instead of using it as a functional tool to navigate the world, you just carry it around.
Like a paperweight.
You build a beautiful, ornate case for it. You set aside 5 specific times a day to take it out and polish the black glass screen. You treat it as a sacred, magical talisman because your ancestors gave it to you and told you it was important.
Oh, that is a brilliant encapsulation of the pathology.
You are meticulously performing the ritual of caring for the object, but you are not establishing a connection with the network. You are utterly disconnected. You have kept the object perfectly preserved, but you have totally, completely lost the function. You have wasted the phone.
And because the function is gone, the society has no anchor. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the intellect and the critical awareness aren't steering the ship, what takes over? As the verse says, once the prayer is wasted, they followed passions.
Base human desires, greed, tribal ego, immediate gratification, they take the wheel. And the verse concludes that this blind following of passions leads inevitably to gay, which translates to total deviation, utter destruction.
It is a perfect, terrifyingly logical diagnostic map. You start with a locked intellect, you lean on the comfort of inherited tradition, you elevate human clerics above the objective text, you hollow out the active methodology into an empty physical ritual, and you end up driving the civilization off a cliff.
It is a chillingly accurate description of how human institutions rot from the inside out.
So, to finally definitively prove that prayer was never, ever meant to be this hollowed-out magic rock ritual, but rather an active, functional, vital system of situational awareness, the analysis takes us to the ultimate stress test.
The proof of concept.
If you want to know what a system is actually designed to do, you look at how it operates under maximum pressure.
Which brings us to the methodology of establishing the system in the middle of a crisis.
We're going to unpack Surah An-Nisa, verse 102. This verse provides specific instructions on how to establish prayer while in a state of intense fear or active physical conflict. We are literally talking about a battlefield scenario.
Let's set the scene exactly as the text describes it. The environment is incredibly tense. It is physically dangerous. The enemy is present. People are terrified.
And yet, in the middle of this chaos, the divine command to the leader is, if you are among them, establish the prayer for them. Now stop and think about this logically. If prayer was inherently defined as a rigid set of physical movements where you have to stand perfectly still, face a specific direction, close your eyes, and completely disconnect from the physical world, doing that in an active war zone would be suicidal.
You would be slaughtered the moment you bowed down.
Precisely. And the verse makes it explicitly clear that this kind of physical disconnection is absolutely not what is happening. The verse commands, Let a group of them stand with you and let them take their weapons.
Let them take their weapons.
This one phrase proves unequivocally that prayer does not cancel out logic, thinking, or situational awareness. You hold your weapon, you keep your eyes open, you stay hyper alert to the physical threat of the enemy flanking you.
It's not an escape.
The prayer is not an escapist meditation. It is a profound grounding within reality. It is the synchronization of collective awareness.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the taqwa we discussed earlier. You are maintaining the internal psychological connection to the unifying methodology, the shared mission, while simultaneously managing the external physical crisis. This system of critical awareness does not shut down just because the environment gets hard.
In fact, that is when it is needed most.
Exactly.
And the analysis points out another incredible detail. The text intimately connects this battlefield practice directly to another foundational concept, paying zakat. Now, zakat is usually translated merely as charity, but structurally it is much deeper. It is social action. It is the active purification and balancing of society's wealth and resources.
By linking the internal state of prayer to the external action of zakat, even in a state of extreme fear, the text demonstrates that establishing prayer is not an isolated spiritual event.
It's a full ecosystem.
It is part of a holistic, balanced ecosystem. It is internal spiritual awareness, inextricably coupled with external social responsibility. One without the other is fundamentally incomplete. You don't just sit in a room and pray while ignoring the systemic needs of the society outside your door, and conversely, you don't just engage in blind activism without the grounding of internal objective awareness.
It is a living, breathing, operational system. But I have to say, what I love most about this specific section of the analysis is that it highlights a detail in the text that is so deeply, beautifully empathetic.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
In the middle of all these intense, high-stakes commands about holding weapons, maintaining formations, and staying hyper-alert, the verse includes this caveat. There is no blame on you if you lay down your arms due to heavy rain or illness, but take your precautions.
It is a stunning moment of profound realism injected into a divine command.
It really is. Think about what that means. The divine methodology here isn't asking human beings to be emotionless, invincible terminators. It accommodates human fear. It accommodates physical vulnerability.
It knows we're human.
It acknowledges that sometimes you get sick. Sometimes you are caught in a torrential downpour, and holding a heavy iron sword is just physically impossible. It says, I know you are human. I know you are exhausted. Put the sword down if the rain is too heavy. But keep your mental guard up.
The awareness remains.
It insists that the internal system of awareness must never collapse, even if the physical posture has to adapt entirely to the messy reality of a rainstorm.
If we step back and synthesize this entire narrative arc that the linguistic analysis has taken us on, it is a profound, paradigm-shifting journey. The original message, as decoded by looking at the raw roots of the words, was a living, breathing methodology meant to create the state of constant, critical, active awareness.
It was meant to be the libas and the cerebral.
Right, the foundational justice and the mental armor protecting human society from its own fatal flaws and its tendency toward internal violence.
It was a blueprint for how to build the feathers of civilization without flying into a cliff. But then human psychology, as it always does, got in the way.
Exactly. Later generations, exhausted by the cognitive load of critical thinking, seeking the safety of the herd, locked their intellects. They elevated human clerics above the text, and they hollowed that living, dynamic methodology out into a series of empty, inherited physical traditions.
They wasted it.
They wasted the system by polishing the smartphone without ever turning it on. And that hollowing out leads, inevitably, every single time to the collapse of the civilization and a catastrophic return to mutual violence.
It's so tragic.
But the beautiful part, the deeply hopeful part of this analysis, is that the original blueprint hasn't vanished. It wasn't destroyed. The cerebral, the mental armor, is still right there in the text, perfectly intact, waiting to be utilized by anyone willing to actually read it, reflect on it, and think critically.
I am just sitting here marveling at how this deep dive entirely shifts the paradigm of how we view our institutions. Because whether you are looking at ancient religious texts or modern geopolitical structures or corporate cultures or even just your own daily habits, the trap is always exactly the same.
We let the why die, and we blindly, stubbornly worship the what.
We trade the robust mental armor of deep, rigorous understanding for the comforting but ultimately useless blanket of tradition.
It is the eternal, exhausting struggle between conscious, critical engagement and unconscious, comfortable repetition.
And that is exactly where I want to leave you, the listener, today. We have spent this time talking about grand historical civilizations, ancient linguistic roots, and the battlefield of human consciousness.
Yeah.
But I want you to bring this massive concept all the way down to your own life.
Apply it to the micro level.
Yes. Think about your own day-to-day existence right now. If, as the text brilliantly suggests, wasting a practice means continuing to go through the physical motions while having completely lost the internal meaning and awareness, what secular daily routines in your own life have you completely wasted?
It's a tough question.
Think about your morning routine. Think about your weekly meetings at work. Think about the way you ask your partner how their day was. Think about your family dinners. Have you hollowed them out into empty, mindless rituals? Are you actually awake and present during them, establishing a real connection, generating actual awareness? Or are you just polishing the screen of a phone you don't even know how to turn on anymore?
Are you awake or are you just performing?
Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the source material. It has been a truly eye-opening, challenging journey. Until next time, keep your armor on, keep thinking critically, and whatever you do, don't lose your awareness.